Hey, everybody, this is Paul. Real quick before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know that I have launched a new newsletter called Local News Industry Pulse. And it is a briefing of news, policy, trends, and more in the local news industry straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you're enjoying the content I'm putting out with the podcast, I think you would also get a lot of value from the newsletter. So if you have a minute, go subscribe really quick to Local News Industry Pulse. You can scroll down in your podcast app and click on the link at the very bottom of the show notes right now, or go to localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com. That's localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com/subscribe, and you can sign up there and stay informed on everything that's going on in the local news industry every Thursday. All right, thanks. Let's get into today's episode.
My belief has always been that the industry's problems are going to be solved at the smaller publisher level. They can move quicker, they're more nimble, they've been strapped by talent and, I guess, expenses, but I think that's where the solution's going to come from.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press, Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Guy Tasaka. Guy is the technology columnist for Editor and Publisher Magazine and managing partner at Tasaka Digital, specializing in innovation coaching for media executives. He has over 35 years of experience in the media industry, working at Macworld Magazine, Ziff Davis, New York Times, Calkins Media, Wide Orbit, and more. Yeah, Guy, we've talked before, but I appreciate you joining me on the podcast to put something out in the world together and spread the message. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. And like I said many times when we've spoken, thank you so much for doing this for the industry. It needs to be done. You coming from outside the media space brings a very fresh perspective and kind of not jaded by everything that's happened in the past.
Cool. Okay. So I had a kind of brief intro of your background, but if you go a little deeper and give us a bit of your bio of your life and career and how you became involved in the local news and media space and just kind of a broad overview of your background.
Sure. So I grew up in Hawaii in Honolulu, and like everybody from Hawaii, I went to college in the Pacific Northwest. So I went to the University of Oregon, graduated with the, call it air quotes, the publisher degree from the business school, marketing and finance, and from the J school. I am four classes short of having a journalism degree as well. So even though I've never worked as a journalist, I appreciate everything. I guess I have the formal schooling to be a journalist, but never worked in the field. After college, I went down to San Francisco and worked for, actually started my career in market research and worked at a market research firm that handled Apple computers as our main client, measured the launch of the Macintosh back in the late 80s. And I never told this story publicly before, but I decided that I wanted to be a magazine publisher. And just by happenstance, as I was flying back from Macworld Expo in Boston, I was sitting next to the product manager of Quark Express, which was one of the early desktop publishing softwares. And he was explaining, he said, what do you think about the new desktop publishing systems? And at Macworld Boston, they had just introduced the Super Mac color computer, the Mac 2, and the world was ready to start desktop publishing. And early on, it cost of entry was about $20,000 to $40,000 to have a system. And I thought to myself, what would happen if I could actually figure out how to build a system for, say, $3,000? Would that give me a competitive advantage? So I went out and built a $3,000 desktop publishing system in 1988. It was using Windows 1.0, Corel Draw, and something called Ventura Publisher. and I was able to output the exact same things. Long story short, we were the first independently published magazine, or one of the first independently published desktop published magazines, and it was in a niche of high end video. So it was called Laser Video Magazine, and that's when I realized there was riches and niches. And the big magazines were million circulation. Mine was 10,000. I got it out to Tower Records in New York City. We had about very good distribution. Everybody loved it, and I realized after doing it for about 6 months that I had no idea about publishing. I knew nothing. I knew how to get the product out, but I didn't know anything about advertising, distribution, and basic essentials of publishing. So I went to work at Macworld Magazine, who had been a client of mine. Then Ziff Davis Publishing, which at the time was a juggernaut in B2B publishing. Ziff Davis moved me to New York. I worked there for about 2 years until Ziff Davis was sold. And then I went to the New York Times, which was the very first, I guess, entry into local media. And at the time, the New York Times was a local publication, or more, it was a city and regional newspaper of national importance. This is 1995. Got there, I worked on the launch of nytimes.com. It was a skunkworks project. I launched the first e-edition, first digital edition. Everybody has an e-edition now, but the New York Times and the Washington Post were the first to have them back in the early 2000s. It's also the New York Times' first digital subscription product, which was fascinating to see kind of the intricacies of running a digital subscription product, user acquisition, multi-million-dollar budget, cost per acquired user was about $200. So you could do everything the way that it needed to be done. Best of breed and everything. Left the New York Times in 2005, and I went into the media technology space. Worked at a company called Newsstand. Worked on the launch of the e-readers, the Sony e-reader and Barnes & Noble Nook. Newsstand, or Libre Digital, actually built the infrastructure to convert newspaper and magazine PDFs into a packaged product for those e-readers. 2011, I worked on the first paywall at the local level for Memphis Commercial Appeal. It was then owned by Scripps. So that was the first. We built the digital subscription system that talked to the print subscription system, and also the first set of paid mobile apps. And it was a lot of fun. We learned a lot. I then went to a company called Calkins Media, and the CEO of Calkins Media had been the executive sponsor at Memphis Project, and he wanted me to build him a media tech company inside of inside of the media company. And we launched the first connected TV apps at the local level, also the first fast channel at the apps at the local level. It was I've been really, really fortunate to be on kind of the front edge of every new technology. One of the things I learned was that from the time you're the first one to do it, it takes the industry about 3 to 4 years to get adopted. So that's kind of where I am right now, just working with publishers, with media executives, trying to understand the landscape of what's coming next, why we need to get there, and how we need to get there. So it's been fun. I write for editor and publisher as their tech columnist. I really don't try to stay away from shiny objects or new tech. It's really about, here's something that I've been watching, and now is the time we're going to start seeing some movement. My most recent article was on XR, or extended reality. That's the blanket category of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And it's about to explode in the coming year, with Apple, Facebook, TikTok all coming out with products, and then a real heavy push into education. So when it gets adopted in education, it'll get adopted in homes. When it gets adopted in homes, there's nothing on there. So for people to watch, especially at the local level. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to look at, get a first mover advantage. So it's basically what I do. I evangelize a lot of new technology products, and I speak on. My favorite publisher is the community publisher and the smaller publisher. In fact, ever since I left the New York Times, I've never really worked with big media. Calkins was a family-owned media company out of Pennsylvania. We owned 6 newspapers, 5 dailies, 1 weekly, and 3 TV stations. And my belief has always been that the industry's problems are going to be solved at the smaller publisher level. They can move quicker, they're more nimble, they've been strapped by talent and, I guess, expenses. But I think that's where the solution is going to come from.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to, and this has kind of been a theme. It's kind of been a theme of our conversations. The smaller publishers is similar to the business landscape, where a smaller, leaner startup can outmaneuver, these big giant, enterprises that are already in play. So that's kind of where you see a lot of the innovation. And yeah, once again, we've spoken about it, and that we'd spoken a few times, but I hadn't heard the full background of your career. It almost like it makes sense in hindsight, but you're perfectly almost set up with 1 foot kind of in the digital businessy space, 1 foot in the kind of pay attention to the journalism space. So it's really interesting to have you on here and talk about that. Interesting perspectives that we've gotten. So kind of shifting into my first thing, and I may have mislabeled this. We've called it a few things before, but one of the themes of our previous conversations was Media 3.0. I think that's what you called it. Or business 3.0. You said not. What is it? Yeah, what is it?
I said don't call it Web 3.0.
Web, don't call it Web 3.0. That's
yeah,
right.
I label it Local Media 3.0.
Local Media 3.0. All right. Can you give us an overview of what that means to you, and just kind of explain your overall thoughts on that to the audience?
Sure. So I've been writing and speaking about the concept of Local Media 3.0, and really what it comes down to is we look at, from the outside, we look at local media as this continuum of it used to be great and then it sucked and then here we are now. But when you look at the data, when you look at what's gone on, there's actually 3 distinct periods. So the period of 1.0 is the period before 2005, where the industry between 1990 and 2000, in a 10-year period, the entire U.S. newspaper industry went from $40 billion to $60 billion, kind of bounced around between 2000 and 2005 due to the dot-com bubble burst. But it peaked in 2005 at 60 billion. And that was a period where we as an industry had infrastructure moats. We had these huge delivery. We had hundreds, thousands of delivery drivers that could take a newspaper from print site to porches in 4 hours. And right now, when you say it out loud, it just sounds ridiculous that you can move atoms, that many atoms.
Sounds like Amazon Prime is the only thing in our current
same
world.
day delivery, right? Except this is 4-hour delivery.
Yeah.
And then we had these huge newsrooms. We had these huge advertising staffs, and we had multi-million-dollar presses that gave us this monopoly over the geographies that we were in. And because of that, we had this unfragmented audience reach, like in many markets. I heard one of your past participants talking about a 76% penetration of his local market. Back in the day, a newspaper would hit 90 smaller towns 100% of, or almost 100% of their local households. So we had this enormous opportunity. The period of 2.0 was from 05 to 2020. Audience was in free fall. The audience fragmented because of, now we had these new things, the internet, mobile, social, that news could be disseminated, but more importantly, advertising messages could be disseminated. The internet, social really disintermediated the newspaper company from the relationship between the advertiser and the customer. Right? The newspaper was smack in the middle back then. And We did a lot of things, a lot of self-inflicted things where we chased bad KPIs. We went for page views at any cost. I know a lot of digital leaders just wanted to create more pages so that we could have more page views, so that we could put programmatic ads and make $1 per thousand on. So, that was a period of chasing a bad business model. Period of 3.0 is, I say now, it's really kind of marked by the period after the pandemic, during and after the pandemic. It just changed a lot of behaviors. And because of that, there are no moats anymore. Don't print. Most of us don't print. Most of us don't do our own delivery. So these moats all went away. Most of us don't have newsrooms and very small sales staff. So that moat's gone. But there also are no swim lanes, meaning if you were a radio or a TV station, you had this FCC license, and that was your license to print money. Well, over the past few years during the pandemic, there are more video streaming hours than there are hours viewing over the air television. More streaming audio hours, as you know, Paul, than people listen to terrestrial radio. So a newspaper can become a TV station and can become a radio station. The swim lanes are gone. This is one thing that I've talked a lot about over the past couple weeks is, and people have it starts to make sense now that AI is going to reduce a lot of the expense and talent gaps. Smaller publishers, they're constrained by time, money, and talent being talent within the newspapers, but also talent within their communities. New York Times is successful because it's in New York City and all the talent you need is there. But if you're in Hermiston, Oregon, or some remote place, the the talent you need to be successful is not there. AI closes all those gaps. So right now, 3.0 is really a period of one for us as an industry to create new gaps. Create new moats. It's a time for us to create new moats for our businesses and really trying to create new value creation models. So does that make sense? And the reason that I felt so strongly about going out and talking about 3.0 is if you look at those timelines, if you were in a senior leadership role in 2000 before 2005, you're probably in your mid 50s by now. Most of the people who've come into this industry between '05 and 2020 only knew this, death and doom and create more page views. That was your model going forward. So if you talk about the revenue in that period between '05 and 2020, the industry went from $60 billion down to $20 billion. So we lost $40 billion of value in the industry. And it was a straight line downhill, a 45-degree angle downhill. So everything that was done in that period didn't work, but we kept doing it. And we got better at doing it because we got better at losing the revenue. So, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later about kind of why that happened, but that's why 3.0 is so important, is so that I can share the story of what made us great in 1.0, and we can get back there, and why you shouldn't keep doing what we've done in 2.0. And it's going to be, the insanity in the same thing and expecting a different result. We've had 15, 20 years of doing it, and it's not proven to be a success story.
What did they get wrong over the last 20 years, publishers? Like, if you
Sure.
had to point to just a couple things.
Yeah. If you were to ask a publisher in the period of 1.0, what's your product and who's your customer? 100% of editors and 80% of publishers would say the newspaper's my product and the reader's my customer. What was happening and what digital platforms had proven out in the period of 2.0 is the audience was the product, the advertiser was the customer, and the newspaper was simply a means of aggregating that audience for those advertisers. That's why we had big, beautiful offices and these huge moats. Is we were creating this great product to we were the trusted source of local news and information. And a reader in the community could come to your newspaper and they would see international, national, regional news. They would see comics, TV, stock. They would see all these curated products that the paper put together. They would also find user generated content like classified ads and marketplace obituaries, events, listings. Right? We were the trusted source of news and information. And because we were able to get 90, 100% household penetration, we made it really easy for the advertisers to get to their audience. Fast forward to 2.0, if we believed that the newspaper was the product and the reader was the customer, we would try to make the newspaper better, and we would have this belief that people wanted to pay for it. Well, one of the things that's really unfortunate is that we called it a newspaper. News is a subset of information. People were coming to us for the information we provide. Some of them were interested in news, but mostly it was the information. And I've listened to, like I said, a bunch of your podcasts. A lot of folks, media entrepreneurs, come from the content side, and they're trying to make better content. And a lot of them have kind of dismissed the relationships with the local businesses. And once we lose that, it's going to be really, really, really hard to get it back. So I think a lot of the newspaper publishers who maintain a print presence, I think that's good, but it's not. There's going to be an end point. You can't keep printing. The model's not going to work, but you have to continue to develop and maintain the relationship with the local businesses. And in the period of 2.0, most media companies only interact with 1% of the local businesses in their communities. If you're in a smaller market, then you're probably up around 5%, maybe 10% if you're in a very rural market and you haven't lost that relationship. But most metros, all TV stations are dealing with less than 1% of the local businesses. I think that's a fantastic problem to have, because if the industry were in the position that we're in, which is, I don't want to call it dire, but not positive, and we had 50% of the local businesses as participants in our offering, I would say we have a real problem. But when we only have 1%, the solution kind of obvious, right? Get more than 1%, create solutions for local businesses. And what we need to understand from a local business perspective is there's three things that local businesses don't have: is time, money, and business acumen. Right? Most local business owners started out as a subject matter expert, an esthetician, a plumber, a hairstylist. They just wanted to run a business. I mean, they just wanted to do their craft. Most of them didn't want to run businesses. Most of them don't know how to run businesses. They don't understand marketing. They barely understand, the finances of doing business. But we as an industry have this ability to provide value back to the local businesses. And I think, and this is what really scares me about the direction that the industry is going in right now, when you're focused on philanthropic funding and reader revenue, you're really dismissing the local businesses. I hear a lot of your interviewees say, "Yeah, we need to start. We don't take advertising," or, it's a lot of work, and I don't want to sell." I think the success of our industry is how much value we can give back to the local businesses, and it might not be a newspaper ad. It might be education. It might be. I think I mentioned in the past, at my former company, we did a B2B newsletter, a daily B2B newsletter, which took information, valuable information for local businesses, and sent it out to them. We took a list of our past advertisers, our current advertisers, and curated a list of companies that it made sense for us to go out to, and provided value. When Gatehouse acquired my former company, they killed almost everything that we were doing except that, because they realized the value that providing information and gaining the trust of local businesses who aren't even your advertisers, you know, pays off in the long run, even the near term. So that's and we have the principles of 3.0 really from what we learned in 1.0 and what we learned from 2.0, but we really need to start thinking differently. And that's why I really appreciate you. I appreciate Editor and Publisher. I appreciate all the press associations that let me present it on their at their conferences to try to get the message out. Just try to have us start thinking a little bit differently, because we don't have 5 years to find out that philanthropic funding doesn't work. Not that it doesn't, but that it might not work. We launched our paywalls in 2011. That was 13 years ago. By 2014, we started to de-emphasize the reader revenue model because we knew that it wouldn't get us to where we needed to go. And that's when we started working on the principles of 3.0.
Today's episode is sponsored by localpod.co. LocalPod offers podcast production and consulting for local news organizations and only local news organizations. LocalPod creates weekly news podcasts based off of the top stories from your publication. You provide the script, we handle the rest. We narrate your news, edit it, produce it with a custom intro and outro with music, and distribute the podcast to all available podcast apps. Your listeners will see your branding and hear your content in their podcast feed, just like wherever you're listening to right now. Podcasts are one of the most engaging digital formats, which is why we can also help you monetize your podcast as well. We offer custom ad reads for your podcast, and we can also set up subscriptions so that you can monetize your audience directly. Have you thought of launching a podcast but want to control it in-house? We can help you with that too. LocalPod offers podcast coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one coaching calls, along with the actionable steps you need to launch a successful revenue-generating podcast of your own. To find out more, visit localpod.co. That's localpod.co. Or just click on the link in the episode show notes in your podcast app. All right, back to the show. I think you put that really well. I think that a lot of people that have been in the industry a long time or are drawn to journalism kind of come to it from a community-centric kind of mindset, and it's very honorable. And I think hearing something like that, that no, the newspaper is not the product and the reader's not the customer. The readers are the product, the advertisers are the customer. I think when you hear that, it kind of repulses some people a little bit. It sounds a little icky. But also, what you were saying, it really shouldn't. It's really providing value for all sides, for that plumber or that esthetician. I think I said that right, in town or whatever. When you view through that framing, it's just more of a kind of a business mindset. And I think it's a beautiful encapsulation of, kind of the point of this podcast is to dig out some of these models that are working and, strategies that are working. And I think that's a really great thing to keep in mind as people kind of look into it. So yeah, I appreciate your feedback on that. So so that was the problem. How do you think traditional publishers, we can leave the new entrants aside for now, how do you think traditional publishers can start to shift their business models that way to 3.0 a little bit? It can probably seem kind of intimidating or overwhelming to completely upend everything, but what could they do to start shifting it? And what does the future kind of look like in your view?
Sure. One of the explanations of 2.0 is I talk about the comparisons between what a digital platform does and what a 2.0 publisher does on four points. The first being first-party data. By digital platform, we're talking about Google, Facebook, Pinterest, even eBay and Craigslist. I would put in those categories. But so with regard to first-party data, right now, when the industry talks about first-party data, we think about email addresses. But really what first-party data is any acknowledgement or any recognition of somebody coming to your properties. So, a digital platform, every user is known because you have to register for that platform. For 2.0 media companies, only a small percentage of users are known. With regard to addressability, meaning once you know who the user is, can you target them with messages and advertising? Well, every digital platform can target based on the behavior of that user. And by And that might sound a little icky to borrow your word, but it's anonymous, right? You look at something like Netflix, and Netflix has 270 million subscribers. And when you go to your recommendations, you think they know about you. What's happened is, because of the way that you interact with Netflix, they've put you in one of 1,700 categories, one of 1,700 audiences. So, you know, you are anonymously put into an audience. So, digital platform, every user is addressable and put into an audience segment. Not so much in 2.0 media company. In terms of content strategy, one of your past interviews said this very well. It's a digital platform. It's either user generated content or system generated content. They don't create any of their original content. Google is just scraping search results and matching it to your query. The value that they present, they put ads in there. A 2.0 media company creates original or syndicated content at, I don't want to say a high cost, but any cost more than zero is a high cost. And with regard to monetization, every digital platform has a low friction self-service ad portal, or they go through a bunch of agency resellers. 2.0 media company, high friction direct sellers, or they go to a rep firm who has their own high friction sales process. And the difference between traditional media, or legacy media, if you will, and digital is legacy media gets big contracts from a few advertisers, hence the 1% of interaction. Digital platforms get a little bit of money from a lot of people, and they have to make it really easy for these people to participate. And I say a lot of people. If you look at the numbers, I believe Google and Facebook combined only deals with 10% of local businesses if worldwide. So if you take the number of businesses that they interact with divided by the number of businesses there are in the world, it's only 10%. They're probably heavier in the United States, but it's still not a big number. There's still a lot of upside. And every single publisher that I've spoken to pushes back on self-service ad platforms, which is kind of crazy, because they're concerned about what percent of the 1% is going to use the platform. They should be more concerned about what percent of the 99% who don't use you will use it. And it's a different mindset. So the 2.0 versus the digital platform, if we understand why they were successful, it leads us in to the principles of 3.0. And I apologize for that long lead in, but this is going to kind of shed some light. So there's four aspects of 3.0. First is content, curation over creation. If you're a weekly or a monthly publisher, you simply don't create enough content to be relevant in the digital world. That once a week newsletter, people will go somewhere else the other 7 days or six days and 23 hours. So curation over creation. There's this great book by Chris Anderson who wrote The Long Tail, and people don't talk about this book. And he started TED Talk, but people don't talk about this book. Any publisher, I think, should read it. It's called Free, and I think it's still free. On the audiobook is free. Used to be free on Audible, but there's this great quote in it that said, 50 years ago, content was scarce and time was abundant. And today, content is abundant and time is scarce. So there's this pendulum of value shifted from original creation to curation. Aggregate community data. One thing we didn't talk about was, we talk about the culprits that killed the industry, air quotes, killed the industry in 2000, in period 2.0. We never talk about WordPress. Prior to 2005, it cost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to raise an enterprise media website. Once WordPress came along, everybody was a publisher. Everybody could be a publisher. And what happens when supply goes to infinity? Rates go to zero, right? And that was part of the problems. I think last year when I checked, there were 1 billion websites. Today, there's probably 2 to 3 billion websites because of the AI. It's so easy to generate content with AI. So the value of what the local publishers are, they're the trusted source. Really need to lean into the the brand that you've established. So go out and aggregate community data, things that exist in 100 different places within your community. You need to be the community hub. You need to know people need to go to a place, might be a government site, might be a lot of other places, but they need to know that this is a trusted source. So go out, aggregate all the community data that exists in your community and put it under your umbrella. By all means, link back to the original sources, but you want to be the community hub. The other thing that publishers need to do is, and this might be sacrilegious, but if you don't have a presence right now, create free event listings and job listings and marketplace listings. One of the things that just kind of makes me roll my eyes all the time is when you go to a small publisher's website and they have a little tab that says classifieds on it. And you go there and there's like 8 ads that they've moved over from print. I think you should go the opposite direction, which is offer everything, job listings, events listings, everything for free, and offer a back to print upsell. And then by all means, be an omni-channel publisher. Get your content out to as many different places as possible. You want to extend the brand. You want to meet people where they're used to consuming product. Second category is advertising. I mentioned earlier, create solutions for as many businesses as possible. Right now, you're only dealing with the people who want to buy an ad from you, print or a digital ad, but there's so much more they need. They need market intelligence. They need help. They need just general business information. You can be the kind of the community hub, give value back, and low friction sales processes. If this industry doesn't solve the problem of reducing friction in the sales process, it's going to be more short lived than it may otherwise be. And the last point is, sell omni-channel. If you have a relationship with an advertiser and they want to buy streaming audio, if they want to buy connected TV, which there's a lot more inventory that needs to be sold in your market, by all means, sell it to them. It's better to have 50% margin on a high revenue growth category than 100% margin on a shrinking category. So, don't be afraid of omni-channel selling. I talked to a friend of mine who's a publisher in Texas, and we were talking about this, and this is kind of a sore point for him. He said, that doesn't sound fun. It doesn't promote our mission of community journalism. So I said to him, let's go back and look at what made us successful as an industry in 1.0. Our business model was delivering the last mile. We made our money because we were able to get preprints into homes. We were the only other way other than the postal service to close the last mile. Our mission was journalism, but our business model was delivering the last mile. Don't lose sight of that. It's really hard to make money from news. In fact, unless other than the New York Times and high-priced newsletters, very few people actually make money from news. The third point is audience. I mentioned first-party data. This is a whole nother podcast and a whole nother discussion, but you need to get all your users, both known and unknown, managed. A customer data platform that's beyond the capabilities of most small publishers right now, but it needs to be done at some point. The technology is getting easier and cheaper now. Reach out to me if you're curious. And then the last thing, and this ties this is possible, use AI agents, and that's part of my new practice series were mentioned about the back office. We get so caught up in the ethics of AI and the jobs it's going to take, but there's a lot of things that you can't do right now. Back office functions, things you should be doing, but you can't because of talent, money, and time. And AI can close that gap. And the last point on infrastructure and operations is it's going to be a short term hit, but get on modern technology stacks. A lot of smaller publishers are using, solutions that are duct taped and rubber banded together, and it's just simply, you're costing yourself in the long run because you can't integrate into a lot of the modern tools that are available. So those are the four buckets of 3.0. I know it seems hard. It's a different mindset, but and I'm not saying don't stop printing your newspaper if you're printing a newspaper, but this is what's going to create the new moat for you going forward, while we solve, the revenue problems. I have a case study that I'd love to talk about. So, so I did this presentation a couple of months ago, and I knew at an event, and I knew I was going to get pushback on it. But for those of you listening, I wrote an article in Editor and Publisher called Newsletter 2.0, and Paul's nodding his head because he reads.
I loved it. I loved that article. Yeah.
So I had spoken to a lot of my industry friends about their newsletter business, and I'd ask them, so where are you with your newsletter business? They're like, we have tens of thousands, we have hundreds of thousands of names in our database. So how much are you making? Less than we'd like to. Give me a number. $25,000. I said, ooh, that sucks. So I really felt compelled to write this story about. It's a newsletter called podnews.net. And when I mentioned it, Paul's first words were, I read that every morning.
Yep.
So not to get caught up in the fact that this is an industry, it's a B2B newsletter and business to business newsletters. It's a community newsletter. Just so happens that the community is people who participate in the podcast industry, whereas local media publishers are a geographic community. So forget the fact that it's an industry newsletter. The principles are 3.0 and it will work in your market. So give you some of the data points on it. It's a 32,000 subscriber newsletter. It publishes Monday through Friday. Remember, there's 32,000 subscribers. They generate 1.3 million page views a month and 51,000 podcast downloads. So going back to omni-channel publishing, they publish a newsletter, they publish a website, and if you go to it, the website is the newsletter. In other words, they lift the web page for that day and they publish it out. And because it's a podcast newsletter, he has to do a podcast. So the revenue opportunity, there's 3 sponsored positions. It's ad supported. It's not subscription based. 3 ad positions, a premier sponsor and 2 smaller sponsors. It has a self-service, low friction, classified advertising, sponsored content, and then a sponsorship well. And at the end, I'll give you kind of a clue to the effort and the revenue that this generates. The 1.3 million page views a month is because they're the trusted source of community data. For anybody in the podcast industry, they know if you want to understand the industry, if you want to understand the players, go to Pod News. They have free job listings and events listings. They have a business directory, an indexed archive. So if you go to, say, Acast, you'll have a little snippet about what Acast is, links to all their pages and resources. And then there's an index archive to every mention of Acast in the past 7 years from Pod News. And then they index every single press release. They put every press release that comes out, they put it up in their data bank. And all that is the source of the community. It's community information. And then the last piece is low friction sales process. I mentioned that they have a self-service classified ad well. So there are little tiled sponsors, and they're nothing fancy about them. They use Patreon, the creators' kind of subscription platform, to sell these sponsored tiles. So it's self-service. The reason they use Patreon, even though they have to give up 5 to 8%, is that now they are discoverable to Patreon's audience. When you Google or when you search podcast in Patreon, they would show up, and now they're found by a new audience. And then the events and the job listings are all self-service. The reason it's free is that they use it as a lead gen tool. Lead gen meaning if you have a job, you're probably a potential advertiser. If you have an event, you're probably a potential advertiser. So it's really a lead gen tool and a way of really being the go-to place in the industry. So I presented this, and this is all the principles of 3.0 in a nutshell, in a microcosm. So when I presented this a few months ago, I see these publishers rolling their eyes, like, "Oh, this is a heavy lift." And I told them that this business is a one-person operation. He works in it 1 hour a day, and it makes a very, very healthy six-figure income. Closer to seven figures, but we'll call it a healthy six. So, it's the technology is there. I refer to his name is James Cridlin. I refer to him as the Tony Stark Iron Man of the media tech industry, because what's fascinating about what James has done is he has built a technology platform that's optimized for the publisher. So he built every single aspect to fit his workflow, to fit his revenue model. That's his measure of success, is how much more money can I don't want to say it this way, but I will. How much more money can I make, and how much less do I have to? Right? Those are his two success metrics. And it's fascinating. I wrote this, and I'm so thankful to James for being so transparent about everything that went into building this. It's 7 years old. He built it from the ground up. And I'll go back to the audience as the product. So the origin story of this is James is a speaker, a consultant. He built this to aggregate the audience of people who are interested in the podcast so that he could sell his consulting services. So you go back, audience, product, advertisers, the customer. He was the customer. So all the principles of 3.0 in a nutshell. The only thing that he hasn't done is really dig deep into the audience management. He could do really well if he went into the really extended his first-party data strategy in that effort. But if you want to see it in practice, here it is.
Yeah, I loved that article, and like I said, I was already a fan of the product, so it is a great one. So Guy, we're probably gonna have to do this again. This might have to be a recurring one, because there's a lot more to talk about, I think. But just the whole local media 3.0 is an amazing concept. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. Can you share how people can connect with you, or anything you'd like to promote? I think you have a new project you're launching soon that we've talking about. Yeah,
I actually do. Thank you. So my consulting company is tasakadigital.com. You can sign up for a quick meet just to talk about what you're working on, your problems. Also, I write for editor and publisher. So for those of you in the newspaper industry, you're familiar with it. It's editorandpublisher.com/tech. And my column is called Tasaka's Tech Talk. And the new project that I'm working on is I am consulting on AI coaching and advising. And I truly believe that the local media problem is going to be solved at the smallest publishers, because they have the greatest need to use the newest technology. And you can reach out to me at the tasakadigital.com. By the time this comes out, I may have a new website that I'll share with Paul to post in his listener notes. But like I said, Paul, when I met you, anything that you ever need from me, truly believe in the cause and the purpose that you're serving. Everybody needs to think differently, because we don't have 5 years to realize that something's not going to work out.
Well said. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.